siempre. El mismo siempre. El mismo siempre.
Lecture taken, not given. Mainly contextual and synergetic, Reggaeton or a haptic lecture on pressure to the north was conceived as a practice-based field research on the socio-sonic mutations of reggaeton as it was presented within the Spanish urban music scene in 2019. The project was developed during a 3-month residency on New Media Art in Madrid, set up by the Just Mad Contemporary Art Fair, which took place between New Serra and Carabanchel, and was supposed to be inaugurated as a performance and sound installation at the fair's opening at Palacio Neptuno on the 26th of February, 2019. Motivated by Madrid's sonic and musical landscape, the project should be regarded as a deviant extension of an ongoing long-term research on synthetic voice and erotica, which intends to locate computational vocal manipulations and synthesis as retro-bioengineering tactics responsible for generating new body diagrams. As such, regarding the geographical location of the residency, the project picked up and departed from the prevalent and defining usage of auto-tuning and synthetic sounds audible in the hypersexual musics deployed by the Spanish urban scene. Thus, the research took interest in the sonic migrations, mutations and hybridizations described by reggaeton, here understood as a common structure that organizes and informs the outputs of a series of Spanish and Spain-based Latin American artists, from its primordial iteration as a variation on Jamaican dancehall to its more recent manifestation as audio assemblages occurring in cyberspace. In that, these new instances seem to trace a diametrical opposition to their origins regarding their aesthetics and embedded politics, which denote a sort of self-correction or auto-hacking in terms of gender roles, sexual identities and their performativity, shaped in lyrical, voicing and sound strategies. To understand such spatio-temporal route, the project began by building a socio-political network mapping translations, transports and modalities of reggaeton, using the dembow, the genre's defining rhythmic pattern as a traceable token across time and space, organized as a clockwise feedback loop culminating in what is perceived as an historical backfire, The following diagram presents a political and cultural network of the dembow, here regarded as reggaeton's building block and as a sonic witness of transformation. Although the diagram can be read from any entry point, we will start our tracing in chronological order, beginning at the British Empire. As Zinks J explains in Empires of Dirt, how the British Empire exported homophobia, back in 1533, during the reign of Henry VIII. The British Parliament passed the Buggery Act, which banned male homosexuality and made gay sex punishable by death. The law was subsequently exported to the Empire's colonies as the Section 377 of the British Colonial Penal Code, criminalizing what were perceived as unnatural sex acts, meaning same-sex intercourse, anal sex and oral sex. Still prevalent in a lot of former British colonies, the law remains in vigor in Jamaica, which was considered to be the most homophobic country in the world in 2006 by the Time magazine. Although recently the law has only been enforced in cases of sexual assault and child molestation, homophobia is a decreasing but still ubiquitous sentiment in Jamaica, with gay bashing being a common resource in entertainment and political debate. In a curious response, described in the diagram as the short feedback, homophobia finds deep and complex contours in Jamaica, as Rastafarianism, the syncretic religious and social movement developed in the island in the 1930s, and which serves as a spiritual and ideological cornerstone for the Jamaican identity, seems to conflate anti-colonialism and homophobia as a monolithic form of resistance against Western imperialism. Regarded as being both prescribed by the Bible and deviant Western imports, same-sex intercourse, anal sex and oral sex are inscribed within the Rastafari anti-colonial agenda as forbidden acts. Such interdictions work hand in hand with a generalized rejection of feminism in the restoration of a black manhood, in the construction of an unyielding, unsubmissive masculine archetype capable of repairing the emasculation perpetrated by colonial powers, or Babylon. Working as a conceptual framework for reggae and sound system culture, Rastafari perspectives on gender and sexuality eventually found their way into dancehall, both music genre and venues. Characterized by its digital instrumentals, known as rhythms, and a preference for Jamaican patois, dancehall, also known as bashment, is unsurprisingly fueled by anti-colonial and anti-gay lyrics. However, in territories of the soul, queered belonging in the black diaspora, Nadia Ellis outlines dancehall as a contemporary platform for queer hacking, sabotage and appropriation. When describing Pasa Pasa, a dancehall reggae event, the author claims it to be the rise of queer masculine embodiment at the very heart of an ostensibly homophobic culture. Reggaeton's sonic building block, the dembow, arises from dancehall, specifically an anti-colonial and anti-gay anthem released in 1990 by the prominent dancehall artist Shabba Ranks. With an instrumental produced by Bobby Digital Dixon and performed by Steely and Clevie, dembow is a politically charged track where Shabba Ranks unsuspectedly rides the rhythmic genesis of reggaeton, toasting bars bashing homosexuals, the ones who bow, who bend over, as submissive traitors of black liberation that willingly bow to oppression, namely, foreigner oppression. Man on the table, me say that him bow. Y'all give that it wash out chip bow. At least big out, I mean no one can bow. A man a eat for, that means say him bow. Sex in bottom, that mean a guy bow. Dembow's beat would become the defining rhythmic pattern responsible for breeding reggaeton. As Wayne Marshall explores in From Musica Negra to Reggaeton Latino, the cultural politics of nation, migration, and commercialization. Departing from dancehall's more disseminated 3-3-2 rhythm, commonly referred to as bong bong, to denote the two kicks before the snare. Dixon's rhythm made use of a pervasive Caribbean rhythm marked by a 4x4 kick pulse and topped by 3-3-2 snare cross rhythms, the soon-to-be reggaeton's boom ch boom chick. The The track rapidly found resonance in Spanish-speaking audiences through the Jamaican communities living in Panama due to a massive labor migration to the country during the construction of the Panama Canal. At the time, there was already a local Spanish reggae scene, reggae en español, commonly referred to as plena or Boltron, that, surprisingly, partially arose from a Panamanian transportation system. The Diablos Rojos were iconic and rather eccentric graffiti-covered buses used in the 1970s by Panamanian commuters. These vehicles served as hubs for the development and propagation of proto-reggaeton forms. As Eduardo Cepeda explains in his article "Tu Pum Pum," Panamanian artists helped birth reggaeton, then the industry left them behind. The Diablos Rojos were part of a fiercely competitive, private transportation system that rewarded drivers for luring the most commuters. Once, 5 young Rastafarians boarded one of the buses that regularly stopped in Panama City's traditionally West Indian Rio Abajo neighborhood, and handed the driver a cassette. Some of the music was custom written for the driver, who paid the young dreadlocked men to write songs extolling his virtues, not just as a motorist, but also as a lover, and all-around badass, hoping to attract more customers. One of the musicians on that bus was El General, a vocalist that would play a major role in the perpetuation of the dembow rhythm, as well as in the migration of Boltron to the United States. In fact, many musicians, producers, researchers and scholars pinpoint Panama and not Puerto Rico as the birthplace of reggaeton, referencing the seminal work of artists like Renato, Killer Ranks, El General, Nando Boom, and producer Michael Ellis. In 1991, El General and his brother-in-law Nando Boom, both residing in New York City since the mid-80s, recorded translated versions of Shabba Ranks' anti-gay tune. These Spanish versions, respectively Son Bo, They Are Bo, and Elos Benaya, They Bow, kept not only the rhythm of the original track but also its homophobic sound.
Hombre con esa falda que se zumbó, alza la mano si no vende zumbo, gritando fuerte no vende zumbo. Hombre con esa falda que se zumbó, gritando fuerte no vende zumbo, salta y rebota no vende zumbo. Hombre que trabaja voz de chica zumbo, dembow, 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 dembow.
In dembow, 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 translation and transnation in reggaeton, Wayne Marshall denotes syntactical shifts within the translation process, as these recordings offer telling examples of non-translation, representing a kind of recontextualized appropriation, in particular, the retention of the term bow, while transforming it from a verb to a noun. Thus, the translation intentionally includes Panama as part of an anti-colonial, and therefore, anti-gay resistance alongside Jamaica, and inaugurates a new derogatory term for male homosexuals, bows. Despite being recorded by Panamanian artists, both tracks were produced in New York, incorporating elements of the city's musical production style, and influences from hip-hop aesthetics, while, especially in case of El General, relocalizing their anti-gay agendas to the local queer communities. The crystallization of reggaeton as a music genre hailing from Puerto Rico is an outcome of the close proximity of Puerto Rican and Panamanian communities in New York. Through the mixtapes of DJ Negro and DJ Playero, an array of proto-reggaeton, reggae and hip-hop tracks, all encompassed under the informal música negra, black music, or molasses, genre were transported back to San Juan, triggering the formulation of reggaeton as such. The dembow, reggaeton's iconic boom chick, remained as a structural element within the Puerto Rican context, being roughly estimated that is still used in 80% of the genre's output. However, since the first instantiations of the dembow, there is an audible increase in the usage of synthetic sounds and digital audio tactics in the production of instrumentals, leaving behind the sample-based maneuvers inherited from Shabba Ranks' track. From the complexification of machinic snare patterns and the introduction of the timbales, to the inclusion of meta-referential Latino elements such as the chata guitars and electronic marimbas bundled into a club-oriented production, In the early 2000s, Puerto Rican reggaeton shifted gears from a Panamanian Jamaican construct into a pan-Latino program. This new stage saw the release of the genre's pivotal international hits, most of them signed by production duo Looney Tunes. The new course set to a mainstream Latin and worldwide audience prompted an attenuation of the homophobic perspectives embedded in Nando Boom's and El General's tracks. Militant homophobia was substituted by a sort of crypto-machismo operating more subtle maneuvers within the romantic yet conservative fiery Latin lover trope, expressed, according to some authors, through an overall objectification of women. The early 2000s saw the release of a track that, due to its narrative and popularity, matched an inflection point in reggaeton's trajectory. Originally released in 2003, as part of her third album entitled Diva, Quiero Bailar by reggaeton pioneer Ivy Queen stands as a feminist anthem emerging from a male-dominated scene. In fact, in 2019, the song was re-recorded by a women-led team of sound engineers and released as a single for the International Women's Day, being the sole female top artist coming out of the Puerto Rican reggaeton scene in the early 2000s. Ivy Queen, who also calls herself La Patra, the Mare, and La Abusadora, the Abuser, became a case study for female agency, with Carolyn Cooper defining her as the embodiment of undomesticated female sexuality and noises in the blood, orality, gender, and the vulgar body of the Jamaican popular culture, and Alexandra T. Vasquez stating that her voice has a deep sound and withholding, a quality that comes from keeping things locked up in your chest. And salon philosophers, Ivy Queen and surprise guests take reggaeton aside. At this point, it's worth to mention the work of Clara, a Spanish-Belgium-based artist and researcher who has been releasing a series of mixtapes through Editions Gravats entitled Reggaetoneras that compile the work of female artists of the genre, many of whom only had one or two releases in the early 2000s. Despite Ivy Queen's outputs and persona being far from consensual among feminist theorists and writers, generating varying takes on the legacy of the Puerto Rican vocalist, her role in re-engineering the male-dominant narratives embedded in reggaeton's genealogy remains quite consensual. However, for the sake of justice, it's imperative to note that Ivy Queen's efforts in challenging discursive vectors inherited from the dancehall reggaeton continuum were met by the work of other female vocalists, even from the Jamaican dancehall scene. Since the late 1980s, acts like Sister Charmaine, Patra, Lady Saw and, eventually, Marta Diamond began to progressively diffuse the anti-feminist sentiment within dancehall, with Lady G's 1988 hit Enough Respect being a clear cornerstone in this trajectory.
Whether you living at the town or in the district, no care me name, no spread no rumor, show me enough respect. No to me living at the ghetto, show me enough respect. No care me name, no spread no rumor, show me enough respect.
Arguably, the global takeover designed for reggaeton is an integral part of the Pan-Latino identity, the emergence of a feminist take on the genre's narrative, and the contemporary massive pluralization of cyberspace prompted the emergence of a global second wave of reggaeton and reggaeton-related artists that established a new political geography and aesthetic landscape for the genre. In this post-digital context, reggaeton emerged primarily as the sonic component of DIY video and image-based contents shared online by millennials who, eventually, decided to invest in musical careers.
Artists, we don't have the influence about where we live. It's more like an internet era and digital stuff.
Acts such like Del Masa Del Rio, Ms. Nina, Lazawi, La Guni Chonga, Bagya, King Jadet, Bipalea or La Favi engage in sonic and visual practices that can be best read by the overlap of the notion of a post-production cultural stage, structured by a rerouting methodology of free assemblage, a voracious appetite for the technological future as a tactic to outrun existing socio-political systems, and the reconception of identity as a matter of play in which fiction doesn't pose as an antithesis of reality, but as a concurrent vector in the production of reality itself. Reggaeton's sonic promiscuity as an essentially hybrid genre proved to be relevant once more in the 2010s, as new vocalists and producers started presenting idiosyncratic mixtures that involved the introduction of elements borrowed from trap, synthwave, industrial, flamenco and exploratory electronic music. Such constructions can be heard in the productions of Dina Marca, Lechuga Zafiro, DJ Florentino, Imabs, Paul Marmita, Zora Jones, and Kamek Slow.
Tuviste que pararte sola en la esquina, llevar la pistola, llevar la pistola, llevar la pistola, llevar la pistola, llevar la pistola. Pensando que vas a hacer si no tienes agua pa' beber. Agua pa' beber, agua pa'.
As such, beyond the outputs of J Balvin, Bad Bunny or Ozuna, there is a vibrant contemporary reggaeton scene mainly composed by queer and female artists that hack and reshape the future drives found in dancehall's genesis, discarding its historical homophobic and male agendas, and repurposing them into new narratives of resistance and self-determination. As it has happened with techno, house, disco and vogue, the club and the airwaves serve once more as political platforms to deploy oral visual materials of reconfiguration and protest. In feminist reggaeton in Spain, young women subverting machismo through Perreo, Nuria Arona, Yolanda Torrejada and Monica Figueras Mas define the new reggaeton scene as an array of music projects from diverse backgrounds that give voice to the artists themselves and use this music style as a parody and as a way of responding to everything they dislike about reggaeton and society, while at the same time re-signifying this music genre and opening up an opportunity to deliver a feminist message. Often referred to as perreo, a term that describes an array of doggy-style dances, the new reggaeton, also baptized as Nia Perreo, a term coined by Chileans Tomasa Del Real and DJ Liz and Peruvian Tech GRL, has been quite prolific in Spain. Artists like King Jadet, Kenya Rikali, La Pile, Jarafa Ray, B. Pelea, Bad Gyal or Brisa Fenoy are Spanish, and most of them hail from the southern provinces of the country. Ms. Nina and Flaca, member of the collective Chica gang, are Argentinians residing in Madrid. It's defensible that beyond the obvious linguistic and historical common ground between Spain and Latin America, that the relevance of the European country as a hub for reggaeton's second wave can be partially explained by the boom of Latin American immigration occurred in the greater part of the first decade of the 21st century, turning Spain into a new gravitational center for Latin American migration, being only surpassed by the U.S., as Andreia Domingo, Albert Sabater and Richard Verdugo explain in Demographic Analysis of Latin American Immigrants in Spain. Although Perreo has met some criticism for being yet again a process of blanqueamiento, whitewashing, of Afro-Caribbean cultures, there's a partial silver lining, admittedly an Eurocentric one, if such complex trajectory is framed as part of a neck-or-relayed oral political response to Europe's export of anti-gay laws and anti-feminist perspectives to its former colonies. As Aparnidaloria Harry Stevens stated how the world inherited anti-gay laws, Spain and Portugal introduced anti-sodomy laws in Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central and South America, where homosexuality figured prominently in customs, myths, and folk tales. In addition, as Suzanne M. Spencer-Wood describes in Feminist Theorizing of Patriarchal Colonialism, power dynamics, and social agency materialized in colonial institutions, a radical feminist theoretical perspective reveals that culturally condoned, systematic institutionalized sexual violence against women was not just an effect of empire but was at the core of Spanish colonizing policy and institutionalized military practice from the 16th century into the 19th century. Adding that the Christian patriarchal limitation of sex to the institution of monogamous heterosexual marriage was enforced through whipping or solitary confinement in the colonial institution of mission prisons, for indigenous sexual practices that the priests considered sinful, such as promiscuity, lewd dancing, polygamy, homosexuality, and transgendered behavior. As a brief side note, it's conceivable that Brazilian funk, also known as funk favela or baile funk, shares a similar evolutionary pattern with reggaeton. Starting as an import of Miami-based through Brazilian immigrants, the funk favela dances started as a sort of fight clubs known as baile de briga, fight dances, baile de corredor, corridor dances, and lado A versus lado B, side A versus side B. In these early implementations of funk favela, the crowd would be divided into groups, A and B, opening a corridor in the middle where they would fight to the music's rhythm, following orders voiced by the MC.
Quando eu comecei, só tinha baile de briga. Não tinha o baile onde todo mundo dançava, principalmente os homens. Eles não dançavam. Eles iam pro baile para brigar no corredor, lado A, lado B, né? E aqui nós conseguimos mudar isso. Todas as comunidades mesmo, que hoje em dia todos os homens rebolam, dançam, se acabam no funk.
The emergence of queer and female vocalists progressively changed the scene, with Brazilian funk displaying a similar and parallel evolution to reggaeton's social programs through the likes of Daisy Chigrona, Toddy Quebro Barraco, Linda Quebrada and Pablo Vittar. During the residency in Madrid, reggaeton appeared to be a rather contentious subject. With a generalized bad reputation, many venues and bars in Malsana and Chueca would be openly anti-reggaeton, with a bar in Calle de Valverde actually displaying an outdoor sign stating no reggaeton. Solo buena música, we don't play reggaeton, just good music. At the same time, the dembow was ubiquitous in Lavapiés, Embajadores, Acero, and Carabanchel. Large groups of Latin American immigrants standing at Plaza Elliptica, in front of Cafeteria Yacarta, waiting for the occasional van pickup to secure a short-term job and construction while listening to cumbia, bachata and reggaeton on cheap Wi-Fi speakers was a certain morning sight on the way to the studio. To a foreigner it seemed like there was a sonic frontier dividing the city between north and south along the lines of Gran Via and Paseo del Prado. Departing from the tense teratomic composition of reggaeton, one that summons several geographies as well as both conflicting and adjacent worldviews, the project's starting point, regarding the systemic use of auto-tune in the Spanish urban music scene, gained new depths. It would be rather short-sighted to discard the vocal manipulations omnipresent in these new musics as production techniques focused on tonality, as a mere sort of correction auto-imposed by these artists and vocalists to artificially acquire singing capabilities within common canons.
Verdura ya, la luna ya, todo mi ser trutila ya, bonita bajo la mula ya, me quiere mandar para la tumba ya. Verdura ya, la luna ya, todo mi ser trutila ya, bonita bajo la mula ya, me quiere mandar para la tumba ya.
Puta, puta, donde me gusta toda la puta.
Singing, much less singing virtuosity, never played a structural part in reggaeton, nor in dancehall air toasting. To give a toast substitutes the notion of singing. One can describe the sonic agenda of these genres, much like hip-hop, as the topping of voice, and not only speech, over rhythmic patterns and low-end frequencies. Voicing stands as a reaffirmation of presence, a presence that makes use of the physical properties of sound to surpass the physical properties of a body. A voice makes a body present even if he is not present. A voice allows a body to go through walls, to expand in space and time, to become apparent even when veiled. As Adriana Cabrero puts in For More Than a Voice, toward a philosophy of vocal expression, the sphere of the vocal implies the ontological plane and anchors it to the existence of singular beings who invoke one another contextually. From the maternal scene onward, the voice manifests the unique being of each human being, and his or her spontaneous self-communication according to the rhythms of a sonorous relation. The untamed and unconfined nature of sound, and the ever-expanding array of signal operations made available by technology, especially computation, lay down the practical and material conditions to perform operations of self-re-engineering beyond the scope of biology and established categories. The voice, at the very least, the acoustical voice, is the sonic result of a body architecture which is simultaneously brought into presence by that same voice. In retrocausality, if the voice changes, the body changes. If the voice changes dramatically, so does the body. From this perspective, auto-tuning becomes self-tuning, and its pervasive and drastic use a part of an overall overproduction that stands for a sense of playfulness towards oneself. A significant technical aspect for this reading is that the vocalists and producers discussed emerge from an independent scene, in that, their technical, and therefore, aesthetic options are self-determined, since they inscribe themselves in close and horizontal structures of discussion, beyond the hierarchies of labels and record companies. Even Bagya, who recently signed to a major label, records her vocals from home, always accompanied by her faithful auto-tune module. Therefore, auto-tune should not be regarded as a correction, but as an option, or eventually, and hopefully, as a correcting option with socio-cultural implications beyond the reach of a single track. It should be regarded as the sonic extension of long gel nails, elaborated hairdos and dramatic makeup. All fictions that labor in the construction of reality, and which manifest urgency through their loudness. The practical output for the Reggaeton or Haptic Lecture on Pressure to the North research can be defined as a sound system that brings into its structure the techno-sexual tension of the music genre through dialogue, placing voice at its core. The project's production began in Porto, with the acquisition of a Suzuki Maruti 800 from a former street racer who used it in illegal competitions around the city suburbs in the late 90s and early 2000s. The car's engine was removed along with its gearbox, radiator, battery, and every single part needed to make it run outside the vehicle. The objective was to extrude the engine as a standalone device to be used as a sound and vibration generator unit integrated in the system both as a noise source, deploying signals of machinic power, and voice modulator. The Maruti engine was driven back to Madrid and reassembled with some modifications. A microcontroller, an array of relays and new wiring allowed to turn on and start the engine via USB, using a Max MSP patch to trigger the motor in real time from the computer as a virtual instrument. Culture plays an integral part in reggaeton's culture, a trait that can be traced back both to the Diablos Rojos and the role that the US played in constructing the genre. From hip-hop to Baltimore club, music emerging or passing through the US seems to inherit or embody the trope of the American muscle, a hot rod mentality that fuses independence, mobility and sexuality through mechanical horsepower and speed. It can be speculated, if one observes the dancehall videos coming out of Jamaica, where the motorcycle is prevalent, that the car is a symptom of the North American geography and urban mesh design, not being as useful, and therefore, relevant, in other spatial configurations. The intertwinement between car culture and tuning with reggaeton became apparent in Daddy Yankee's Gasolina and Don Omar's soundtrack for the Fast and Furious movie franchise, and prevails within the Spanish scene, epitomizing an almost Ballardian tension between organic and mechanic, danger and pleasure, machine and sex, a construction not at all unfamiliar in contemporary culture. Following Simon Sellers discussing Ballard's technolust and applied Ballardianism, the conceptual, or even physical collision between body and engine, furthers an agenda of self-manipulation and reconstitution, as self-deconstruction, since the body is indelibly altered and the resultant scars become conduits to a new and more intense sexuality, accelerated by the logic of the car crash and its intimate reshaping of the human form. Such assemblage was technically implemented through a series of signal processing techniques to establish a basis for the sound system outputs. The project had the collaboration of one of the aforementioned vocalists from Madrid to provide some vocals specially for the project, so that they could be used as inputs into a series of sonic procedures designed to hybridize voice and engine sound into new objects. The chosen techniques avoided the mere juxtaposition of sounds, mixing them side by side, focusing instead on mutual manipulation and interference, as the conceptual framework for these technical operations was not to create a sum of the two inputs, a discernible joining of two parts, but to synthesize the inputs into an object of a third kind.
Bailamos reggaeton. Bailamos reggaeton. Bailamos reggaeton.
Rómpete el traje, 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 rómpete el traje.
The sound system was designed to make use of these techniques in real time, activating the car engine and multiplying its signal with incoming vocals, or by deploying a database of pre-recorded samples. These objects were played over variations of the dembow that engaged in a complexification of snare and timbre patterns, overdriving the original structure of the rhythm. These sonic events were visually accompanied by a collection of liquefied and meltdown footage of pornographic and erotica, depicting historically so-called unnatural sex acts, same-sex intercourse, oral sex and anal sex. Conceived both as a sonic performance and sound installation, Reggaeton or a Haptic Lecture on Pressure to the North was cancelled the day before its inauguration, due to some last-minute logistic and production problems pointed out by Palacio Neptuno. The only way in which the project could be shown was without sound, and without turning the engine on. Although a series of previous technical visits to the palace over the span of 3 months guaranteed the safety, technical and logistic solutions to proceed with the project as it was intended, the organization of the art fair pulled back in the end and the project was aborted, thus adding another perhaps unintentional, but still effective, layer of estrangement to the whole situation, since the collaborating vocalist was not able to perform at the palace. In the beginning of 2020, the piece was picked up by Marta Espiridião and Andreia Santana as part of their Sonic Materialities project. A 2-day event encompassed a preliminary lecture on the project with Marta, Andreia and Marta at Caves, a turbo clubbing event at Perro La Negra, Porto, with Flocka from Chica Gang in the lineup, and a performance of the sound system that for the single presentation kept its stage intentionally empty.
Pa' que mueva la cintura,